Okay, is there any scientific evidence for God? Well, I'm going to do 3 short video clips on the second law of thermodynamics, and this is part 1, and I'm going to equate the second law of thermodynamics to abiogenesis, the first life, and how it got started. So without further ado, let me get into the secular science video clip by Brian Cox on the second law of thermodynamics, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Back in the 19th century, engineers were concerned with the efficiency of steam engines. You know, how hot should the fire be? What substance should you boil in the steam engine? Should it be water or should it be something else? These were profound questions. And out of those questions arose the science of thermodynamics. It's when concepts like heat and temperature and energy entered the scientific vocabulary for the first time. Now, along with that deeper understanding emerged what is probably the most important law of physics for understanding the evolution of the universe and the passage of time. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. The reason the second law of thermodynamics was so profound was because at its heart it contained a radically new concept, something physicists call entropy. Entropy explains why, left to the mercy of the elements, mortar crumbles, glass shatters, and buildings collapse. And a good way to understand how is to think of objects not as single things, but as being made up of many constituent parts, like the individual grains that make up this pile of sand. Now, entropy is a measure of how many ways I can rearrange those grains and still keep the sand pile the same. And there are trillions and trillions and trillions of ways of doing that. I mean, pretty much anything I do to this sand pile, if I mess the sand around and move it around, then it doesn't change the shape or the structure at all. So, in the language of entropy, this sand pile has high entropy because there are many, many ways that I can rearrange its constituents and not change it. But now let me create some order in the universe. Now there are approximately as many sand grains in this sandcastle as there are in the sand pile. But now virtually anything I do to it will mess it up, will remove the beautiful order from this structure. And because of that, the sandcastle has a low entropy. It's a much more ordered state. So many ways of rearranging the sand grains without changing the structure, high entropy. Very few ways of rearranging the sand grains without changing the structure, without disordering it, low entropy. Now imagine I was to leave this castle in the desert all day. Then it's obvious what's going to happen. The desert winds are going to blow the sand around and this castle is going to disintegrate. It's going to become less ordered. It's going to fall to bits. But think about what's happening on the fundamental level. I mean, the wind is taking the sand off the castle and blowing it over there somewhere and making a sand pile. There's nothing fundamental in the laws of physics that says that the wind couldn't pick up some sand from over here, deposit it here, and deposit it in precisely the shape of a sandcastle. You know, in principle, the wind could spontaneously build a sandcastle out of a pile of sand. There's no reason why that couldn't happen. It's just extremely, extremely unlikely because there are very few ways of organising this sand so that it looks like a castle. It's overwhelmingly more likely that when the wind blows the sand around, It will take the low entropy structure, the castle, and turn it into a high entropy structure, the sand pile. So entropy always increases. Why is that? Because it's overwhelmingly more likely that it will.
Okay, so when I have a chance to debate atheists, and I've even got a video that I'll show later, they talk about the second law of thermodynamics, and one of the claims is that the second law of thermodynamics doesn't apply to the Earth because the Earth is not a closed system. It has a sun, and it's constantly adding energy into the biosphere, so therefore the second law of thermodynamics doesn't necessarily apply to us. Okay, well, is that true? Well, according to the video, we're talking about Brian Cox, a physicist. If you look at the environment he's at, where's he at? Well, he's in a remote location down by a beach somewhere, at least in a sandy location, and the buildings are dilapidated and falling down. Well, why are they falling down? Well, the second law of thermodynamics is taking over. So, by the way, he also talks about where the second law of thermodynamics was developed, and it was developed by steam engine engineers. So, and of course they live here on the Earth. So the second law of thermodynamics, which they say doesn't apply, was found out by engineers on the Earth, and they say, so obviously it does apply. And in this case, according to the video, it applies to a sand pile. Sand pile versus a sandcastle. Well, the sand pile has very high entropy, and the sand castle is a state of very low entropy or high order, and the sand pile is a very high entropy and very low order. So what does that all mean? It just means this. You can, like Brian Cox said, you could rearrange the sand pile in any trillion number of ways and it still looks like a sand pile. But a sand castle is a very structured order, and it is very unlikely. How unlikely? Very unlikely to happen. There's a man named Sir Fred Hoyle that says any probability, that is 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power, would be like a miracle. Well, trying to estimate how many trillion ways you could rearrange the sand pile, it could be anywhere from 1 chance in 10 to the 1000th power. So anyway, it's just astronomically more unlikely that a sandcastle will ever be produced from a sand pile by chance alone, by Mother Nature. It just doesn't happen. So when you walk down to a beach and you see a sandcastle, you know that somebody was there. Somebody did it. Same with, say, a cave painting. You walk into a cave, you see a cave painting. No one in their right mind would say that Mother Nature ever did that. Or if you see Mary Loves John written in the sand, again, you wouldn't say, oh, look what Mother Nature was able to create. No. In fact, Mary Loves John is a little more complicated and ordered than a sandcastle for one reason: information. Not only does it have a structure, Mary Loves John, in a specific, and it's a structure in a specific order. The letters have to be in the correct order and convey information. So it's really more structured than the sandcastle. The sandcastle is one structure, basically. Okay. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to contrast the second law of thermodynamics in regards to a sand pile and Darwin's little pond. Darwin's little pond is a place where there's, a liquid substrate, and you've got to have a bunch of amino acids running around in this little pond just randomly running around in this little pond. So with the pond and the amino acids running around randomly in the liquid, then somehow these 200 proteins magically come together by pure chance to form the first cell. But wait a minute, it gets much worse than that. In fact, I had a kind of an epiphany the other day. I was debating an atheist, and we were talking about the 200 different proteins that you need, and but we got down to the first protein. My deal was that the chance of one protein coming together by chance is 1 chance in 10 to the 77th power. And there's a little video clip I'll leave in the description that you can watch of the actual scientist who did the calculations, talking about how unlikely even one protein, and a small protein at that, of 150 amino acids long, coming together by chance. Anyway, we were debating just the one protein, and so the atheist, he could see, he could imagine, and he did some hand waving, really, because he didn't come up with a figure after he did his, well, this could mitigate it, and this could mitigate it, and this could mitigate it. Okay, but we were only talking about one protein. We're up to 200 proteins right now. In other words, a protein, in my opinion, is way more complicated than a sandcastle, but let's just put it at sandcastle level. So, first of all, you want me to believe that Mother Nature can't create one sandcastle, but now you want me to believe that Mother Nature is going to create 200 sandcastles all at the same time, and all of that's going to come together by chance. Well, wait a minute. Don't get too much in a rush, because it's going to get a whole lot worse mathematically for you here in a moment. Watch this. Okay, now here's a quote. It's official. There are some 42 million protein molecules in a simple cell. That's right. Say what? 42 million protein molecules in a simple cell. Okay, now those cells, in other words, the majority of the proteins, exist within a narrow range between 1,000 and 10,000 molecules. What does that mean? Well, that means of the 200 proteins, some of those proteins need 1,000 copies of themselves. Some of those proteins need 10,000 copies of themselves. And guess what? If you read on, you'll see that some of those proteins need 500,000 copies of themselves, all at the same time. That's ridiculous. The math, if the chance of one protein coming together is 10 to the 77th power, and you're going to tell me now we're up into the millions of protein molecules, and since there's no way of, there's no known mechanism for copying all of these proteins, once you develop the 200 proteins, how are you going to make copies of them? What's the mechanism that would cause those copies? And just the right copies, like this one needs 1,000, this one needs 6,000, this one needs 10,000. Oh, this one over here needs 500,000 because it's part of this structure, and this one needs 10,000 because it's part of this structure, and this one needs 8,000 because it's part of this structure. Come on, where are all those proteins going to come from? And it takes 42 million protein molecules in a simple cell. And you're going to tell me that in Darwin's little pond, that each protein, each sandcastle, Mother Nature can't make one sandcastle. Now we're talking millions of sandcastles for one cell. That is hogwash of hogwashes. I'm sorry, but it is. It's out of the stratosphere beyond all reason. You cannot say that could happen. So, from 10 molecules, and that is 10 copies of it, to 500,000 copies of the 200 proteins. So you still need all 200 proteins, and then you need all those copies of all those different proteins. Well, I'm telling you what, that is just ridiculous to believe that. And you can believe that if you want, but that's ridiculous. But now, we're going to make it even worse. Okay, here's another quote. Here's Eugene Koonin. He's a origin of life scientist, well known in fact. Despite considerable experimental and theoretical effort, no compelling scenarios currently exist for the origin of replication and translation. That's right. So we're bringing in 2 other systems that need to be in the first cell, not just the proteins, but there's 2 systems that have to be in the cell before you can get life. Because once you get the cell, you have to be able to replicate that cell and translate that cell. You have to be able to take all that. You have to have information. We haven't even talked about the information. And of course, here in this particular quote, watch this. It says, the key processes that together comprise, that is, replication and translation, are the key processes that together comprise the core of biological systems and the apparent prerequisite. Listen to that. This is a prerequisite of biological evolution. Now, it says the RNA world. Why do they use the RNA world? Because RNA conveys information, and it's simpler than DNA. The RNA world concept might, that's not science, offer the best chance for the resolution of this conundrum, but so far cannot adequately account for the emergence of an efficient RNA replicase. In other words, no replicator. You have no idea how this first cell, they have no idea how this first cell could replicate itself. And no wonder. The MWO, though, whoa, here we go. What's that? Well, the many worlds in one version of the cosmological model of eternal inflation, here we go, could suggest a way out of this conundrum. Because in an infinite multiverse with a finite number of distinct macroscopic histories, each repeated in an infinite number of times, emergence of even highly complex systems by chance is not just possible, but inevitable. Here we go again. So, in other words, it's easy for the atheist to believe in, quote, eternal inflation, but you can't believe, and it's very difficult for some reason to believe that a being could live eternally. But eternal inflation can be true, but not a being. Oh, by the way, if you're interested, there'll be a link in the description below talking about the multiverse. In 2021, the multiverse is a fairy tale. It is a fable. And in the video, you'll see one of the well-known scientists say it's like believing in angels or fairies or something. He says it in kind of a jest. You can, again, this is not science. This is speculation of the highest order. And you know what it is? It's the God that the atheists always bring in to the picture when they are up against a wall and it is calculable, impossible that any of this could happen. What do they bring in? Well, infinite chance. Okay, so you can believe in infinite chance and an infinite number of universes, but you can't believe in an infinite God that could do all of this. Okay. Since the multiverse is not science, it cannot be tested in a lab, it does not follow the rules of science, it is not science in 2021. It is speculation of the highest order. And it's funny because atheists always accuse Christians of, quote, blind faith. Well, right now, the multiverse is your blind faith testimony. Anyway, I've got another video coming up on the second one will be coming up here in a minute, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.